food prices up 13%, rent up more than 6%.
One of the world's biggest hedge funds just warned that we are heading into hyperinflation that can lead us into a global societal collapse. They issued this warning saying that this could be worse than World War II. Now, the hedge fund responsible for this accusation is Elliott Management, and they own over $56 billion of assets under their name. So this hedge fund sees this economy possibly turning into that direction of a global societal collapse. But we see what the Fed is doing. They're aggressively trying to kill inflation by hiking the interest rate. But at the same time, prices are still super high and there's still a big affordability issue. Goods and services are now more expensive than ever before, and we have officially started the housing market crash. But what exactly is hyperinflation? Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about what hyperinflation is. We're going to talk about what causes hyperinflation. We're going to talk about if the US is actually heading into hyperinflation and different ways that you can protect yourself if we do go into hyperinflation. So to start off with, what is hyperinflation? According to US News, hyperinflation is a phenomenon in which the prices of goods and services in an economy rises uncontrollably in a short period. Inflation is typically considered hyperinflation if prices rises by 50% or more in a month, which is an annualized inflation rate of at least 14,000%. Yeah, we're obviously nowhere near that. The current inflation rate here in the United States is around 8.2%, which is considered high for our standards. But hyperinflation, its annual rate is between 12 to 15,000%. And that's because, of course, every month prices are jumping 50%. So the cost of a dozen eggs go from $1 one month, and then the next month is $1.50, right? And then the next month, it jumps another 50% to $2.25. And so, yeah, those are little small changes to something that small, but the percentage of that is actually really great. Now, for most countries that have experienced hyperinflation, this only lasts a short period of time because the government steps in right away and make huge changes to their monetary policy. But during hyperinflation, people are in a rush to buy goods and services because they know the next month is going to double or triple in price. And so by them rushing to buy these goods, that in turn raises the price even more. So hyperinflation not only causes higher prices, it also causes a lower supply and people having less money to start new businesses, which you need in order for an economy to run and to thrive. Now, for some examples of hyperinflation, we have to start with Germany. During World War I, the Germans, in order to pay off their war expenses, printed 92.8 quintillion paper marks to pay for Germany's war debts. Now, quintillion, I don't even know how to express that. I know, of course, there's a million, there's a billion, there's a trillion, and then there's a quadrillion. Yeah, that's a lot of money. So you can understand by printing all of this money, what that does to the value of their money. And of course, it devalued its money to its lowest point. Just for some comparison, during that hyperinflation in Germany, $1 was equal to 4.2 trillion marks in Germany. During normal levels, it only took 4.2 marks to equal $1. Now, I don't think the US economy will ever get to that point. Our inflation rate, like I said earlier in this video, is around 8.2%. But according to this hedge fund, there's a possibility we may head into this direction. In their letter, Elliott Management, the hedge fund responsible for making these comments, put most of the blame on policymakers, the central banks, the Fed, the government. Because like most countries, during the pandemic, the United States lowered interest rates to close to 0%. They forbeared a lot of debt for a lot of people. And in turn, that increased their money supply. And that was all good and everything during the pandemic. But what a lot of economists complained, and what Elliott management, the hedge fund, is complaining about, is just they held these rates so low for that amount of time for a little bit too long. That in turn will lead to long-term consequences like a hyperinflationary time. Now, as Americans, once we got the fear of COVID out of our mind and we saw that money was cheap and it was pretty inexpensive to borrow money, we started buying and shopping a lot. We started overbidding on houses, buying vehicles we don't need. And now a lot of car manufacturers are basing their prices based off of that time period, that's very special time period that is different than all other periods. And it seems like a lot of car manufacturers are not getting that to their mind. If you could feel my sentiment, because I feel like a lot of car manufacturers are just pricing their vehicles, their new vehicles, extremely high, and it's absolutely ridiculous. People were paying over the retail price, over the MSRP. That's because money was cheap. Money's not cheap anymore. You have to come back to your senses and stop hiking up your prices $7,000, $8,000 for your vehicles. But this video is about hyperinflation, so let's stick to that. Now, to be honest, I do not see hyperinflation in our future, because just mentioning the interest rate again, 14,000% versus 8.2%. Yeah, we're nowhere near that. But we can actually look back to see what experience we have around higher inflation rates, or close to being hyperinflation. The first thing I want to talk about is during the Civil War. The US Confederacy during the Civil War actually started printing out their own notes just to pay off their debts. And it just seems like during the wartime, governments, countries, they get anxious. They're all like, how are we going to pay for all of our weapons and equipment and materials and everything like that? And they start just printing money, printing their own money. And that's what the Confederacy did. And that rose prices over 9,000%. Now, that's only looking at the US Confederacy, not the whole US. And so we don't really count that as a time when we were actually in hyperinflation, but it's a good example that could possibly happen. Now, the highest inflation has ever been for the US recently has been over 20%, and that was during World War I around 1917. And of course, it's during wartime this happens. And so you see that war happens, inflation happens, and then it comes back down. And then we have some peace, we have some, better economy, better practices and money policies and everything like that. And then it just levels out. I mean, there is a war going on, but not with us specifically. But, what do you all see happening with inflation? Do you see ourselves going into hyperinflation? And what will cause that? And so, it's very similar to what happened here in the United States with just looking at what happened with the Confederacy. And then during World War I, we started kind of doing the same thing 2 years ago. We started printing a ton of money. It was all caused by printing money. And so since we recently done that a little bit too long and with a little bit too excess, will we reach that point? I'm still not 100% convinced, but you never know. But what if we do head into that direction? What are some things that you can do in order to protect yourself and possibly even invest? I think the number one thing we can do is say no to higher prices. Because when people think that prices are going to rise next month, they rush and buy things this month. Even though prices this month is ridiculous, right? They're ridiculous. Still, if it doesn't fit your budget, just understand it's going to go down. Like, it ultimately boils down to us. Like, we can afford it. We can afford certain things, or we can budget certain things. And so we don't have to run out and buy something because we think it's going to rise 50, 100%. Like, you look at the car manufacturers, it's going back to the car manufacturers. Honestly, if we don't buy their cars that are costing so much money, like normal cars, like back in the day was considered affordable is not considered affordable anymore. And so you have to start saying no to these vehicles, saying no to these businesses, and saying, because like the more we buy these higher tiered, higher priced commodities, goods and services, the more they're going to raise their price. And so I think that's one thing that you can protect yourself from and do during this time. I think the other thing that's actually a positive during hyperinflation I was reading online is that since hyperinflation raises or devalues money, and a lot of times people have to bring like so much cash to buy like a loaf of bread. Let's say you have a fixed debt that you owe like $10, but now you own like $100 million, but it's not worth that much because now a bread costs $100 million, but that debt is still $10. You can easily pay off that debt. And so I guess that's one positive thing that you can do. Another thing during hyperinflation is that your investments like real estate or any other goods that you have usually goes up in value. And so, yes, it would go super high in value and drop back down, and like it's gonna seem like it crashed, but it's just going back to normal levels. But in reality, it was not going to go super low where it becomes like a recession or a depression. It's just going to level out and gradually go back up, but it's still a good time to hold investments during that time. I would love to know from you all down below what you all think of hyperinflation. Is this your first time hearing about hyperinflation? What do you all think? Do you think the United States is heading into it? Is this a possibility for us to experience? I would love to know down below. Or stagflation, that's another one. Let me know down below. Make sure you like, comment down below, and I'll talk to you